Chapter 25. Aftermath. The crossing to Sigurdsson for the most part was uneventful. There were a couple of minor engineering failures, as one might expect if Zenobia were a new-build ship, due to the stresses all the systems had endured during the crash hyperspace transition within the hard system periphery of Kodu. The assessment and repairs had been thorough, however, and no major failures occurred. Jan and Bill spent a lot of time in their cabin, where Jan picked Bill's brain for more information on how the Navy legal system in general and boards of inquiry in particular worked at Sigurdsson. They plotted and planned. They also spent a lot of time together, just cuddled up on the double bed. When the squadron arrived in Jablonka orbit, Jan received a message that she should report to the CNO's office immediately upon returning to Sigurdsson. In response, she forwarded the message to the Judge Advocate General's office requesting legal representation, to which she received a positive reply. Her attorney would be Senior Captain Mitch Forsyth, a career military defense counsel. When Jan and Bill got off the shuttle at Sigurdsson, there were 2 ground cars waiting for them, and a senior captain with legal division patches was having a discussion with a pair of MPs. Having apparently resolved the issue to their mutual satisfaction, the MPs got in their ground car and drove off, while the senior captain approached Jan and Bill. "Admiral Childers, I'm Senior Captain Mitch Forsyth." "Pleased to meet you, Captain," Jan said. They shook hands, and then Forsyth turned to Bill. "You must be Admiral Campbell." "That's correct, Captain. Pleased to meet you," Bill said. They shook hands, and then Bill continued. "Was that a little misunderstanding we saw getting off the shuttle?" "Indeed it was, sir, but I think I have it straightened away for the moment. Contacting Jag from orbit was well considered, Admiral Childers. We should probably continue this conversation in the comfort and privacy of my office. Admiral Campbell, could we drop you somewhere on the way?" Bill took the hint and allowed himself to be dropped off at Intelligence Division headquarters, where he had a meeting with Admiral Durand, who was currently the head of Intelligence Division, Admiral Birkin having retired a year prior. Jan went to the Legal Division building and followed Forsyth to his office. Once behind closed doors, he explained the process and his role. "Admiral, I am a career defense counsel. I have represented service members as clients in various cases like courts-martial, suspensions, demotions, and the like for almost 20 years. I like to think I'm pretty good at it. That is up to you to judge, however, and if at any time you are dissatisfied with my performance, you can request a replacement from the Judge Advocate General's office. One thing you need to understand from the beginning, and Admiral Graham should already know, is that, in the context of the Board of Inquiry that will inevitably result from the loss of ships on Kodu, you are not a defendant, you are a material witness. Depending on the outcome of the board, you may later become a defendant in one or more separate proceedings, but all such considerations are estopped by the Board of Inquiry." "Estopped?" Jan asked. "It's a fancy way of saying put on hold, Admiral. You see, since there has been no finding of any kind, and the facts are therefore currently unclear, there can be no offense with which you can be charged. Once the Board of Inquiry has made its determination of what happened, then one might find that one or more offenses have occurred for which you or others may be charged. So you are not, strictly speaking, a defendant in the upcoming proceedings, you are a witness. Admiral Graham's attempt to interview you is thus a serious breach of process. I will send the CNO's office a strongly worded letter about their attempt this morning to interfere with a material witness to a Board of Inquiry, which is what that clumsy attempt to take you into custody in fact was. And I will copy the commandant of the MPs here at Sigurdsson on that letter in an effort to forestall any further attempts to harass you. Since a Board of Inquiry regarding a loss of ships in action is called by the Defense Minister, the President of the Board is delegated higher authority than the CNO with regard to board proceedings. If they persist, I will petition the President to refer disciplinary action against Admiral Graham to the Defense Minister. This rarely happens, and I suspect my letter will be sufficient. Now to some specifics. You should report into your local commander, which, since you have been removed from operational command, is your specialty commander, the head of the tactical division. Since the head of the tactical division, per regulations, presides over the Board of Inquiry in which you are a material witness, the conversation should be the military equivalent of "Hi, here I am," followed immediately by "See you later." There can be no substantive discussion between you and the President of the Board of Inquiry with the proceeding pending, lest the proceeding be compromised in some way. I will accompany you to that meeting and to any other meeting you have on Sigurdsson with anyone outside a strictly social context. Any request for such a meeting should be run past me, but I will tell you that I generally advise against any such meetings. And if anyone brings up any issues that are before the board at a social event, you are to say nothing and notify me immediately. The best thing would be to simply leave immediately and call me. I will give you a private number where you can reach me at any time, day or night. Additionally, you should not initiate discussion of the matters before the Board of Inquiry in any way with anyone. Do not try some sort of PR campaign to clear your name. Let the process unfold in its own time. It is my experience that the best long-term results are obtained in that way, regardless of how personally frustrating the interim period may be for you. It is important for the Navy that the proceedings of a Board of Inquiry not be compromised, that they proceed per the regulations. There are always people who seek to manipulate board proceedings in some way. For this particular Board of Inquiry, that is perhaps more true than for others. It is part of my job as an attorney and officer of the board to make sure that doesn't happen. My first task will be to interview you at length as to your involvement in events, and the facts about which you will be called upon to testify. We will handle that in a series of lengthy meetings over the next several weeks. I have some research to do before I will be prepared to conduct those interviews. I will get in touch with you when I am ready to proceed. Do you have any questions at this point, Admiral?
Just one, Captain. How long will the Board of Inquiry take?
For a matter of this magnitude, I would expect the entire process, from now through the publication of its findings, to take no less than a year, and no more than 18 months. That may seem like a long time, Admiral, but it is quite speedy considering the importance of coming to a proper finding.
Admiral Campbell, come in, Admiral Durand said.
Good to see you, sir, Bill said. They shook hands, and Bill sat in the chair that Durand waved him to. Bill was carrying a small black case, perhaps 3 inches by 5 inches and an inch thick. Is that what I think it is? Durand asked.
Yes, sir. The complete forensic package from Kodu.
Bill handed Durand the case.
Excellent.
That was nicely done, collecting all the forensic data immediately. I saw your inventory in your report. Well done, Admiral.
Thank you, sir.
I don't have to tell you, of all people, how important this Board of Inquiry is. Mistakes were made, and we lost 5,000 people. I have my own opinion of what happened, and I suspect it's not too much different than yours. But other people have, well, shall we say, a different view. Perhaps even a vested interest. I assume Admiral Childers has obtained legal counsel from JAG?
Yes, sir.
Who did they assign? Durand asked.
Senior Captain Mitch Forsyth.
Excellent. I suspected Admiral Kavanaugh would tweak to this, and apparently he did. All the defense attorneys in JAG are pretty much bulldogs, especially those assigned to flag rank cases, but Mitch Forsyth pretty much sets the standard there.
That's good to hear, sir.
No doubt. Durand tapped the evidence case on his desk and looked at it absently while he collected his thoughts. There's another matter that's bothering me about the Kodu incident. As I understand it, the Paradiso ships appeared in Kodu not long after Task Force 32 arrived at Kodu 5.
That's correct, sir. The fleet exercises had not even begun. I happened to be watching in planetary CIC when the Paradiso fleet dropped out of hyper.
And the orders for fleet exercises had not been circulated on Kodu?
No, sir. I know for a fact that they were closely held by the Task Force 32 commander until mere days before they spaced for Kodu 5.
As I suspected. I would have been surprised had Admiral Childers done otherwise. But that means, Admiral, that someone here on Sigurdsson advised Paradiso of the fleet exercises well in advance. It's a month's transit from Paradiso to Kodu. Putting a fleet together and spacing to Kodu from Paradiso didn't happen overnight.
Yes, sir. My thoughts as well. All right, then. I have a new assignment for you, Admiral. It's time we finally cleared out the rats from the cellar. You've worn an inspector's badge before, and you're good at it, so I'm giving it to you again. I want you to assemble a staff and go after the active agents here on Sigurdsson. We've been too lax on this for too long, and we got away with it. 5 destroyed ships, 3 drifting hulks, and 5,000 dead spacers later, I finally have license to go after them in a big way from higher.
Excellent, sir. It's time, and past time.
Assemble your staff requests, Admiral. You have priority over just about anything else on my plate, and you know the people you need better than anybody. At the same time, we need to keep this quiet. We don't want to chase them out. We want to find them and kill them. Think of some misdirection you can use as a cover.
Yes, sir. I'm on it.
Good hunting, Admiral. Jan and Bill compared notes when they finally got home to their standard-issue furnished flag townhouse. Their bags had been delivered to the house and were sitting on the living room floor when they arrived. Bill went to one of his bags, dug around for a few minutes, and found the Inspector Specialty badge he had worn for the Grand Tour. He applied it to his uniform, then turned to Jan. How do I look? Rear Admiral Inspector? Criminy makes me shiver, and I didn't do anything, Jan said. Yes, that could be a bit of a problem. I need a cover. He didn't say what his assignment actually was, and she didn't ask. By this point, they had been playing this game a long time. Well, that seems obvious. You're looking into what happened on Kodu, Jan said. At Sigurdsson, not on Kodu? Sure. All the officers and crew from my battleship squadron are here now, not there. Okay, maybe. I'll have to think about it. What about you? How did it go over at JAG? Bill asked. I like Captain Forsyth. He seems like he knows what he's doing. Durand says he sets the standard for the defense attorneys over there. He was really pleased at the assignment. His view of Kodu is the same as ours, apparently. Really? Well, that's nice. It makes me think I'm not crazy. No, hon, you're not crazy, Bill said. Anyway, Forsyth says I shouldn't talk to anybody about anything. Period. Until the Board of Inquiry publishes its findings. And he says this whole thing is going to take a year to 18 months before it shakes out. That sounds about right. So I'm going to be grounded with no assignments for a year to 18 months. Does that give you any ideas? Jan asked. Bill looked into her eyes for a long minute. Maybe it's time to have that talk we keep postponing, Bill said. That's what I was thinking. I won't even have to put in for maternity leave. It was more than 7 months later that a visibly pregnant Vice Admiral Jan Childers testified to the Board of Inquiry. Jan had been surprised to find that the uniform section of the Personnel Division actually had regulation maternity uniforms available even for Vice Admirals. She appeared before the board in full uniform, with all her decorations. The Merit Board had weighed in with their independent assessment of the Battle of Kodu with another award of the CSF Combat Medal, making a total of 3, and the Victorious Action Ribbon, making a total of 6. They also corrected what they considered a previous oversight, and added Theater of Service ribbons for the systems Jan had covered on the Grand Tour. Waldheim, Courtney, Natchez, Meili, Bliss, Hutan, Mountain Home, and Shanti. She had already had a Theater of Service ribbon for Waldheim for the Battle of Fyarm, so they added a silver star to that one. Together, her Theater of Service ribbons covered almost half the Commonwealth. The total decorations Jan wore to the Board of Inquiry proceedings were the CSF Combat Medal with 2 clusters for Parchman, Fyarm, and Kodu, the CSF Science Medal with cluster for her original hyperspace dissertation and for her later work defining the inner and outer system envelopes, the Distinguished Service Medal with 3 clusters for Valor, Cerestic, Calumet, and Fyarm, the Victorious Action Ribbon with 1 gold star for Valor, Parchman, Cerestic, Pahadan, Fyarm, and Kodu, Theater of Service ribbons for Valor, Parchman, Cerestic, Pahadan, Calumet, Bahia, Waldheim with 1 silver star, Courtney, Natchez, Meili, Bliss, Hutan, Mountain Home, Shanti, and Kodu. Basic Tactics School Badge, Advanced Tactics School Badge, and Unarmed Combat School Badge. Jan had to weight the other side of her uniform jacket so it would hang straight. She was the most decorated officer in the room. The Board of Inquiry was not an adversarial proceeding. There was no designated party, that is, a person under investigation. It was the investigation of an event. As such, there was no adversarial process, no cross-examination. The direct examination of witnesses was carried out initially by counsel for the Board of Inquiry, and other questions were asked by the board members themselves. The members of the Board of Inquiry were named by the Defense Minister in convening the board. As the event under investigation was under the command of a Vice Admiral, and all board members were required to be senior to any principal, the members of the Board of Inquiry all had to be 4-star full admirals. Because the event under investigation was a combat loss of ships, they all also had to be line officers, not staff. Because of this requirement and the limited number of line full admirals available, it was acceptable under the regulations to use recent retirees as well as serving officers. The members of the Board of Inquiry in the Kodu incident, named by the Defense Minister, were the obvious choices: Admiral Jeanette Shee, head of the Tactical Division; President, Admiral Janos Stepik, former head of the Tactical Division; and Admiral Desmond Deshpande, the prior commander of Task Force 32 on Kodu. So how did it go? Bill asked. You know I can't discuss my testimony, Jan said. Let me guess. They didn't ask any questions you hadn't anticipated, and they focused on your orders as you understood them, your written objection to those orders, your planning for the foreseeable incursion, and the actual manner in which the battle unfolded. End of story. I won't characterize my testimony. I can characterize you, though, as unusually insightful and experienced in these matters.
Ha! Told you. Nothing to worry about.
What about your day? Jan asked. Oh, same old stuff. You know I can't tell you anything either. Okay, so let's talk about something else. Names. I thought you had decided, Bill said.
Well, I know what I like, but you've been noncommittal. I just didn't want to make you feel locked into anything, leave you free to change your mind. So you're good.
I'm good, Bill said.
Then it's decided.
Margaret Peggy Childers Campbell was born 2 months later. Senior Chief Margaret Peg Cho, retired, had died the previous year. The Board of Inquiry had still not released its findings. The Board of Inquiry had a lot of evidence to consider. The ship's bridge and sensor recordings for every surviving ship of TF-32. The set of plans and estimates Jan had drawn up for various operations to counter an offensive move against the planet under several different scenarios. The plans and memos concerning the naval exercises on Kodu 5, themselves drawn up at Sigurdsson. The complete contents of Jan's computer account, including all messages and documents, the complete contents of the computer accounts of dozens of naval staff officers at Sigurdsson, up to and including the current Chief of Naval Operations.
Jan's working assumption in her forecasts was that emerging from hyperspace in a crash transition with the hard system periphery would leave TF-32 with 12 effectives among her 24 non-destroyer ships. Personnel losses she forecast at up to 18,000 naval personnel killed as the result of the loss of half her ships in each class. That TF-32 retained 16 effectives after transition was testament to the maintenance regimen maintained by her officers and crews. Personnel losses were limited by the survival of the 3 Alexander-class battleships that suffered major engineering failures. Most of their 7,200 spacers survived because the ships did not blow up on re-entering normal space, though they were rendered ineffective for the battle. Jan's forecasts showed she considered and rejected the idea of bringing any of the 16 destroyers and their 6,400 combined crewmen on the operation, as her estimates for survival of the fragile smaller ships were as low as 1 in 4. Even with those losses, against an outer colony force that would be unlikely to include any battleships, Jan's forecasts showed that she concluded the operation could be pressed successfully against any outer colony force she was likely to confront. Few outer colonies, and none in Kodu's sector, fielded battleships. They preferred lighter and faster combatants for their typical operations. Battleships were twice as expensive as heavy cruisers, hard to hide, and usually easy to avoid. So the outer colonies preferred the heavy cruisers as their largest combatants. Jan's forecasts of TF-32's likely losses were weighed against her forecasts of the economic and personnel losses likely to be suffered by Kodu if an outer colony raid were mounted against Kodu with little or no CSF opposition. The forecast losses in personnel, in the credit value of infrastructure, and in ongoing economic impact dwarfed her forecast of TF-32's losses.
Jan also considered other losses and benefits. In particular, she considered the PR disaster for the CSF if an outer colony force successfully carried out a raid on a Commonwealth planet against ineffective or non-existent CSF opposition, compared to the PR benefit of proving to the outer colonies, once again, the CSF was not to be toyed with, and they would do anything, literally anything, including risking a crash hyper-transition of an entire task force well within the system periphery, to protect Commonwealth citizens and business interests. It also had the benefit of trimming back at least one outer colony navy and encouraging them to mind their P's and Q's at home. In the end, Jan prepared 16 sets of navigation plans, 8 sets of firing plans, and 10 additional hyperspace transition modulations against the possibility of an outer colony force taking advantage of TF-32 being out of position to defend Kodu. All this forecasting and planning was done well before Second Fleet made its appearance at the Kodu system periphery. The board noted Jan's written objection to her orders for the naval exercises, and the ease with which staff officers at Sigurdsson dismissed the considered objections of a flag-rank commander with extensive space and combat experience.
The board also noted the speed and effectiveness with which TF-32 was able to respond to the threat to Kodu posed by Paradiso's Second Fleet, which speed and effectiveness they attributed to the forecasting and planning work done well in advance by TF-32's commanding officer. Peggy was 4 months old when the Board of Inquiry released its findings. That put it at the low end of the time range that Captain Forsyth had predicted. The full findings were not made public, although the executive summary was released. Bill sent the executive summary to Jan from the office when it came out. When Bill got home that night, Jan was nursing Peggy in the big comfy chair in the living room. "Did you see the board's executive summary?" Bill asked. "Yes, I read it while your little terror here was taking her nap." "My little terror? You had more than a little to do with it. Most of it, in fact." "Yes, but when she's ill-tempered, she's yours. I have such a sunny disposition, you know," Jan said. Bill laughed. "The report was a complete vindication of your actions, and with a big pat on the back for your planning and execution," Bill said. "Yes, I saw that. The full report is even more explicit, I should say, strongly worded. You're off the hook. There can't possibly be any charges against you now." Jan sighed, and Peggy mewed and squirmed, then quieted down again. "It's still 5,000 dead, and those bastards still run the Navy," Jan said. "Maybe, maybe not." "What do you mean?" "There's going to be tremendous pressure for Graham to step down, and a lot of his people will go down with him." "Are you talking out of school?" Jan asked. "Nope, word's out on the street already, and several members of the Commonwealth Council have called for his resignation already." "Good. Nothing would please me more." It was 6 days later when Bill came home with the news. Jan was again nursing Peggy in the big comfy chair in the living room. "Graham resigned as CNO this afternoon," Bill said. "Really?" "Yes. The calls for his resignation got so strident in the council, including the chairman, the defense minister asked for his resignation this morning. It was either resign or be sacked. He resigned." "Will he be charged with anything?" Jan asked. "I don't think so. It's not against the law, or even against regulations, to be stupid. That would also open up questions about who named Graham CNO and why. I think they're going to let that sleeping dog lie." "Too bad. I'd like to see him drawn and quartered." "I know. But there are some of his people that are, a little more exposed, you might say," Bill said. "Excellent. Speaking of which, I may have some long days over the next month. Are you going to be able to handle Peggy and all?" "Oh, sure. You go get 'em," Jan said. "Yes, ma'am." "By the way, who's the new CNO? I assume they named someone." "Admiral Leahy came out of retirement to help clean things up." "The previous CNO? That's a smart move. I wonder whose idea that was." "No comment," Bill said. In the end, it was 3 months of long days, at the end of which Bill met with Admiral Durand. "That makes what, 6? Durand asked. "Yes, sir." With Admiral Leahy back at the helm, Bill had been free to follow up on his year-long investigation with computer and bank account searches. 6 agents of foreign governments had been found on Sigurdsson, including one from Paradiso just in the Naval Operations Center. All had been arrested and were facing capital charges. "Do you think you got them all?" "Not likely, sir. There'll be more, including outside of the NOC. But they'll be a lot harder to find. We'll keep at it," Bill said. "Actually, I want your second to take over the job. That's Senior Captain Savikar, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. He's up for promotion. I want to make him Rear Admiral and have him take command of your section. I have something else for you." "Is Savikar up to the job in your opinion?" Durand asked. "Yes, sir. No problem at all for him." "Excellent. Because it just so happens that I'm in the market for a Chief of Staff this week, Admiral, and I think you're the best man for the job." "Chief of Staff to the head of Intelligence Division? Wow," Jan said that evening. "And heir apparent, it looks like. The previous guy was a little too chummy with Graham's people. One of the things Captain Savikar found in the computer data was that Durand's office was leaking to NOC. Was he arrested? Will he be charged?" "No. It comes under the category of an error in judgment. Durand was fuming, but he knew that. He himself had contacts all over Sigurdsson, all over the Navy, in fact," Bill said. "But his loyalty was never in doubt." "No, he never leaked anything that made Birkin or Intelligence Division look bad. He built useful relationships in support of his boss and the division. Anyway, The chief of staff got shunted out of the way, and Durand was looking for a replacement. And I'm it. And a 3rd star. Nice, Jan said. We're the same rank for once. Wonder how long that will last. Well, I still have 4 months until Peggy is 1 year old. So with me out of action until then, I think you're safe. A likely story, Bill said. It was just 2 weeks later that Jan got a request, not an order, she noted, to stop in at Tactical Division and meet with Admiral Shi. Admiral Childers, it's good to see you, Admiral Shi said. And you, ma'am. They shook hands and both sat down. How's Peggy? Good, ma'am. She's a handful, but that's to be expected. Good. Excellent. She looked down at some notes on her desk, then back up at Jan. I know you have several months left on your leave, but there were a couple of things I needed to bring you up to date on. First, the defense minister nominated, and the Commonwealth Council has seen fit to name you a full admiral. Congratulations, Jan, she said. Thank you, ma'am. That's unexpected. Well, it's actually getting to be around that time, and they decided not to wait. For all that, it's not many admirals who have saved a Commonwealth planet from an incursion like the one in Kodu. Jan didn't know what to say to that, and she went on. The other thing that's been working its way through the channels is the reason I asked you to come and see me. The Merit Board nominated it, the Defense Minister approved it, and now the Commonwealth Council has passed it in closed session. For your actions in Kodu, you have been recognized with the Commonwealth Charter Medallion. Congratulations, Admiral. She stood, so Jan stood, and then Admiral Shi saluted her. Jan returned Shi's salute and shook her hand in a daze. The Commonwealth Charter Medallion was the Commonwealth's highest military honor. Admiral Shi sat back down, and Jan half sat, half collapsed into her chair. I don't deserve it. I was just doing my job, Jan said. I believe that every recipient of the CCM says exactly that. But in fact, it's not true, Jan. You didn't just follow orders. You exceeded your orders by planning for an incursion that headquarters assured you would not come, and then you selflessly threw yourself and your task force into the breach to save the planet. I've seen your loss estimates, don't forget. You fully believed you had no better than a 50-50 chance of surviving yourself, that it would also cost half your ships and crew, and you made the decision without hesitation that it was in the overall best interest of the Commonwealth to press on. Task Force 32 responded to the Paradiso incursion within minutes. You protected Kodu, you saved the Navy and its reputation from its own stupidity, and you did so despite the very real danger to yourself. And further, because you were prepared, the actual losses were just over half what you estimated. The CCM is meant to encourage that sort of thing. There was no public ceremony for the award of the CCM, partially because the nature of space battles meant it was so often awarded posthumously, partially because the nature of space travel and planet assignments meant it could wait years before a living recipient was back on Sigurdsson. Admiral Shi opened the top side drawer of her desk and withdrew a long, flat black jeweler's box. It opened with a hinge on the short side. She opened it and set it on the desk and slid it across to Jan. Congratulations again, Jan. Trust me that it's well deserved. When Bill came home that evening, Jan was again nursing Peggy in the big, comfy chair in the living room. Jan was in the plain ship suit she preferred for casual wear. It was handy for a breastfeeding mom, because the zipper down the front made things so easy. Her uniform jacket was hung over the back of the swivel chair at the desk. Hi, hon, how did the meeting go? Bill asked. Then he spotted her uniform jacket with the 4 stars of a full admiral on the shoulder patches. What did I tell you? Turn the chair around, Jan said softly. Bill swung the swivel chair around so the front of her uniform faced into the room. When he saw the CCM atop all her other decorations, he half sat, half collapsed into tailor seat on the floor and just stared at it for a while. Huh. Gotcha, Jan said, softer still. Bill turned to her. That's amazing. I told Admiral Shi I did not deserve it. She said that's the standard response from every recipient, and that I was wrong. Chapter 26. Back to Work. Jan was coming up on the end of the partial maternity leave she had taken when the Board of Inquiry findings had come in at the short end of the time range.
Going back onto active status was looming. She didn't know what kind of assignment could be in the works, but she wouldn't take a spacing assignment. She wouldn't be separated from Peggy for weeks or months at a time. Even a planet-side assignment off Jablanca would mean a month in transit in a shoebox-sized cabin with a 1-year-old, which was way too much of a good thing. Maybe there was something that, as a full admiral, she could do here at Sigurdsson. Division head or something. She had taken over a tactical division within the last couple years, so that was unlikely. But maybe there was something.
And then there was still what she called the Kodu problem. She would not again order thousands of spacers to their deaths because of pathetically stupid orders from higher.
Perhaps it was time to retire after all. There was plenty of money. In almost 20 years in the CSF, she had hardly spent anything at all. Jan was a person of simple tastes, with no expensive vices, and her basics had always been provided by the service. Between her initial stake as a Commonwealth citizen, the first 5 years of stipend, 20 years of salary in the CSF, and some smart investing, she had grown a nest egg that was sizable, much more than enough to comfortably retire on. Jan was at that point when she got a request to meet with the CNO, Admiral Thomas Leahy. He requested the meeting at his house on Sigurdsson rather than in the office. Dread warred with curiosity about what the CNO would propose for her duties. There were 3 large houses on the edge of Sigurdsson Fleet Base, on the opposite side of the base from Jezkra, the capital city of Jablanca. They stood in a row along the shoulder of the first of the hills south of the base. From their front porches, one could look out across the fleet base toward the towers of downtown Jezkra in the distance. Their backyards were fenced gardens sheltered from the wind by the houses and the hills behind them. A gate in the backyard fence of each allowed walking up into the hills beyond.
They were large houses, built for entertaining guests to the base. They included large public rooms, a chef's kitchen that would do credit to a small restaurant, in which 4 or 5 could work at a time, and a formal dining room that would seat 20. All 5 bedrooms in each house had en-suite bathrooms and a small sitting room.
It was called the Hill. The houses were assigned to the Chief of Naval Operations, the Chief of Naval Research, and the Planetary Commander of Sigurdsson Fleet Base. Jan made sure Peggy was happy, and the woman who was her day help during the week had everything she needed well before the car showed up in Flag Row to pick her up. She was in full uniform and had fought herself back down to her pre-pregnancy weight. She and Bill were sparring again, and it felt good to once again be so loose and fit. The driver held the door for her, and Jan got into the big staff car. They rode in silence to the south end of the base and up the road to the 3 big houses on the hill that overlooked Sigurdsson from the foothills. The driver pulled into the loop drive and stopped at the base of the stairs to the porch. He held the car door for her as she got out.
Jan paused at the top of the stairs and turned to look out over Sigurdsson. So many memories here. There was their townhouse on Flag Row. There, the gymnasium where she had met Bill. The apartment blocks where she had spent most of her base time before Bill. The Tactical Division Headquarters Building. The Intelligence Division Headquarters Building. The Commissary. And even the Officer Candidate School. Unchanged in 20 years.
Jan turned back to the front door where a senior chief held the door for her. "Morning, ma'am." "Good morning, Senior Chief. Is our boss in?" He smiled at that as he closed the door. "Yes, ma'am. This way, please." He led the way back through the house, through the large living room, through the formal dining room, through a set of French doors, and out onto a flagstone patio where Admiral Leahy sat, also in full uniform, at a patio table under a big umbrella. A coffee service was out on the table. There was 1 other cup and saucer set. Leahy got up as they approached. "Ah, Jan, thank you for coming." He held out his hand. Jan saluted first before shaking. "Good morning, sir. Good to see you again." "Same rank, and we're not in the office, Jan. Call me Tom." They sat down at the table. The senior chief poured coffee for Jan and withdrew. "How's Peggy doing?" "Coming up on 1 year. Been trying so hard to walk, it's scary. Tom, I dread when she goes on active status." Leahy laughed. "And Bill?" "Good. He really likes his new position. He and Admiral Durand are 2 peas in a pod, it seems." "Excellent." Leahy absently stirred his coffee, then looked up at her. "You're coming up on the end of your leave, Jan, and I wanted to talk about what you might want to do when you return to active status. Have you given any thought to it?" "Yes, quite a bit, actually. I won't accept spacing duties because I won't be separated from Bill and Peggy for long stretches, and it's not fair to pull Bill out of Sigurdsson when things are going so well for him. Not fair to the service either. He's very good at what he does. Leahy nodded, and Jan went on. I can't see a planetary assignment off Jablanka with a 3 to 5 week transit time. A ship's cabin with a 1-year-old on the way out can't be anybody's idea of fun, and the return trip with a 2 or 3-year-old is worse yet. Can you imagine? Leahy laughed. And Tom, I can't needlessly order thousands of spacers to their deaths again because of pathetically stupid orders from the NOC. Once is quite enough. I have my 18 in. Maybe it's time I hang it up. Leahy nodded. Cogently summarized. You know, of course, that the whole Navy feels the same way about Kodu. They won't again sit still for an ass like Graham. Jen, I'll predict that there won't be another staff officer elevated to CNO for 100 years. The rank and file won't stand for it, not while the Navy's institutional memory holds Kodu in its mind. There's an anxiety now with orders from higher that runs from below decks all the way to flag rank on the operations side of things. It's a major concern because I am going back into retirement. I quit this job once already, and whoever takes over as CNO has to have the full confidence of the Navy, the whole Navy, from top to bottom. But I think I have a solution. To my problem, to your problem, and to the Navy's problem. Really? Yes. Jan, would you consider being Chief of Naval Operations? Jan's coffee cup hit the saucer with a bang. It was more of a controlled drop than properly setting it down. It was a good thing they were using the patio dishes and not the fancy stuff. She just gawked at him. Her conscious mind was in shock, even while her automatic thought processes began sorting, sifting, organizing, and rearranging facts, impressions, and possibilities. It's a very nice house. It comes with the staff, including childcare staff if you want. The food's good, the neighbors are quiet, it has a pretty view, the backyard is fenced. I thought the swing set could go right over there, Leahy said as he waved toward an open spot in the gardens. He had a twinkle in his eye as he watched her come to grips with his proposal. No space travel. You've already been to half the Commonwealth, more than me. No long separations, short commute, home every night for supper. It's got a lot going for it. Jan shook her head. Tom, doesn't the CNO have to be nominated by the defense minister and approved by the foreign minister and the chairman of the council? Yes, that's all been done. You're their choice, if you take it. Another shock. Jan, 2 months ago, we surveyed active and retired flag ranks as to who they would like to see as CNO. We asked for 3 names. Jan remembered. She had nominated Admirals Jeanette Shee, Desmond Deshpande, and Richard Murdoch. 95% of them nominated you as one of their choices. 20% didn't even name anyone else. Just you. Admiral Ludkin, because there had been some reports of friction between the two of you in Bahia, messaged the defense minister personally from his retirement to make sure the DM understood that you were his only nominee on his survey form. The defense minister also came to Sigurdsson and walked around the base. He stopped a number of non-coms at random and asked them who they would nominate. Every one of them said you. One senior chief said they would follow you straight into hell because the devil didn't stand a chance. He didn't get any suggestions from the non-coms of anyone else. No one else at all, Jan. Not one. As far as I'm concerned, you're the one person who can pull the Navy back together after Kodu. Leahy sat back and sipped his coffee. Jan looked up into the hills behind the house. A million questions sifted themselves, organized themselves, prioritized themselves in her mind. She asked the big one. How are the staff issues sorting out? Jan asked. Pretty good, I think. I've weeded out Graham's know-nothings and sycophants. Intelligence Division did a good job cleaning out most of the foreign agents. I think most of them, anyway. Bill did a nice job there. The Chief of Staff knows what she's doing and is easy to work with. We've moved competent people up into the openings. Lots of people new to their positions, but solid experience one and all. And they're working out so far. On the political side, the Defense Minister is a big fan of yours and is open to input. He'll ask your opinion on big issues at his level and actually listen. He won't be a problem. I also talked with my neighbors. The CNR, Kurt Wisniewski, is enthusiastic. You've done a lot of work over the years with the intelligence and research types, and you have a really good rep over there. He wasn't at all fond of Graham, called him a jackass. The planetary commander is Dej Deshpande, who you relieved in Kodu. He said, thank God, when I asked him about you as CNO. On the personal side, know that you can call me any time. Sometimes you just want to talk to somebody who's done the job before.
I'll be there for you. Jan looked down at her coffee cup. She ran her fingers around the rim absently. Then she looked up at Leigh. I need to talk to Bill before I can give you a decision. Of course. I'm still holding down the shop. Take the time you need.
As always, Jan was nursing Peggy when Bill came home. It seems that feeding time was feeding time for all the Campbells. Hi, hon. How did your meeting with Admiral Leigh go? You need to sit down first, Jan said. Okay, Bill said. He sat down on the sofa facing her. How would you like to move up to the hill? Jan asked. He asked you to be planetary commander? No. CNO. Bill just stared at her. He said that the Navy needs someone they have confidence in after Kodu. Everybody looks at their orders now and wonders, are these orders stupid? Are they going to get my people killed? It's a crisis of confidence, Jan said. Bill shook himself out of his shock. Yeah, I'm not on the operations side, but I've certainly picked up on that. They surveyed all flag ranks, active and retired, a couple months back. I remember you telling me about that. I'm not under the CNO, so I didn't get one, but I remember that you did, Bill said. He said that 95% of them named me as one of their 3, and 20% named only me. One name. Wow. And then the DM walked around Sigurdsson and stopped non-coms at random and asked them, and every one of them named me. No one else from anyone. Just me, Jan said. That I find less surprising. So what do you think? I asked you first. Well, there wouldn't be any more stupid orders from the NOC, not unless you signed off on them, Bill said. I was thinking more about how I pull it off. With Peggy, with maybe having another child, with you. Lots going on. Yeah, but CNO is a policy and personnel job. You need to set policy, set long-term direction. You need to make sure the right people are in the right positions, that they have the right resources. But it's not a hurly-burly job unless you want it to be, hun. You delegate almost everything. If you need to know something, you delegate someone to find out. If you need something done, you delegate someone to do it. The most important part of the job is making the right decisions. And you only get the hard ones as the easy decisions get made lower down the organization. It's the tough ones that float to the top. Still, I think it can be an 8-to-5 job if you want it to be. There's a lot of staff for the house and the kids. You have a car and driver. You can have people come up to the hill if you can't go into the office for some reason, send the car around to pick them up. With all that, on the personnel side, it's probably easier even with kids. Even with pregnancy, for that matter. What about you? Jan asked. I'm good. Personally, well, it's a nice house. Peggy will have great in-home daycare. You'll have a lot of help with everything. I don't see a downside. Professionally, I think it's great. Operations needs someone who knows what they're doing over there. And you've always been good working with intelligence and the other research divisions. Mostly, I think it's tremendous for the Navy. Smart move. Jan stopped into the CNO's office after another day of letting her decision settle in. She was shown into Leigh's office. They shook hands, sat down. Jan took a deep breath, let it out. I'll take the position. Excellent. Let me tell you how it works from this point. 2 days later, the defense minister made his announcement. It was during the lunch hour, and it was carried on the big displays in the mess rooms on Sigurdsson. When he announced that Admiral Thomas Leahy was retiring, again, as Chief of Naval Operations, the tension ratcheted up in all the mess rooms. The typical noisy bustle of the messes dissipated into absolute silence. When he announced that Admiral Jan Childers had been named the new Chief of Naval Operations, everyone in the officers' messes stood and applauded. In the enlisted messes, they cheered wildly. The Commonwealth Space Force, across its length and breadth, breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 27. The Problem with Earth. The first 2 weeks after Jan was named CNO were a tremendous bustle of activity. Leigh introduced her around to staff. Most importantly, the Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Megan Ming. She and Jan hit it off right away, and she was a lot of help getting settled in. Jan met with 2 of her division heads every day just to say hello and ask what issues they were most concerned about with respect to their own responsibilities. It took the whole first week to get through them all. And there was paperwork.
Lots of paperwork. Jan had people to write most of it, but she read a lot and signed off on lots of items big and small. Some she thought were incomplete or ill-formed, and she sent them back. Most reappeared later, much improved. There was also the move. Leahy had not moved completely into the house on the hill, knowing and hoping that he was CNO once again on only a temporary basis. Jan and Bill, meanwhile, had never really set up permanent housekeeping in the way a vice admiral normally would. Bill had been a rear admiral, and Jan on administrative leave and then maternity leave on their return from 2 years on Kodu. Until recently, their status had been in flux, and they had not wanted to make more permanent arrangements with everything up in the air. They had been content to have help in and have most meals delivered into Flag Row from the officers' mess down the road. Moving into the house on the hill was something of a shock. The house had a major domo who ran the house and directed all the staff. The staff included the major domo, 2 butlers, 2 maids, 4 day staff, and 1 night staff for the kitchen, a gardener, a driver, and personal assistants for both Jan and Bill. All of them were senior non-coms in the CSF. When they moved in, the major domo also brought on 4 childcare professionals, so there was 24-hour assistance with Peggy. They were also senior non-coms. All the staff had high-level security clearances. The house itself was a Class 3 secure facility. Going from some part-time help to a full-time staff of 18 took some getting used to. Jan asked the major domo about it. "George, do we really need 18 people to run this house?" "Ma'am, anything we can do for you gives you that much more time to do your job. And most of us cut our teeth below decks, ma'am. We couldn't be happier that you are the CNO, or to help you any way we can." In addition to the household staff, there was also around-the-clock security on the hill. They were unobtrusive and did not report through the major domo, but they were always there, and Jan and Bill both carried a radio call button as a security alarm. So did the major domo, and there was a call button in the kitchen and the upstairs hallway as well. Jan started a tradition in her first week as CNO. One day every week, usually Wednesday, she would change into a plain, unmarked ship suit and walk to one of the 4 large enlisted mess rooms on Sigurdsson for lunch. She would sit at a table by herself and eat her lunch, the same lunch they had. She let it be known through the grapevine that she was approachable by anyone who needed or wanted to talk to her. The first 2 weeks, no one approached her. But gradually, in 1s or 2s, people would come and sit at her table with her. Sometimes they brought her problems that affected them personally. Sometimes concerns about something they thought should be addressed. Sometimes she would wave at a small group at random as they came off the cafeteria line and ask them to sit with her. She asked them how things were going and heard all the scuttlebutt running around. And in their own mess, in her plain ship suit, she told them to call her Jan. It drove her security detail absolutely nuts that she waved them off at the door of the mess rooms. They waited outside, nervous as a pregnant cat. She spoke to the commander who headed her detail. "Commander, no one is going to hurt me in one of those mess rooms. If they tried, the spacers would tear them limb from limb. I'm more vulnerable in the NOC, and besides, I'm not particularly a soft target." She invited him to observe one of her twice-weekly mid-morning sparring matches with Bill at the gym. They were both in their mid-30s and had not slowed down. After watching the 2 of them go at it for half an hour, he dropped his objections. In her 3rd week on the job, Jan called the CNR, Kurt Wisniewski. "Wisniewski." "Kurt, Jan Childers." "Hi, Jan. What can I do for you?" "I want to meet with Admiral Durand, and he's your report. I don't want to step on your toes." "No problem, Jan. Thanks for the consideration, but you can meet with Admiral Durand any time you'd like. No need for a heads-up to me. Intelligence and operations need to work closely together." "Thanks, Kurt." "Don't mention it." Jan met Durand in one of the Class 1 secure conference rooms in the basement of the intelligence building at her request. Bill, as his chief of staff, was also there. "Admiral Childers, we meet again." "Admiral Durand." "And I believe you know my chief of staff." "Indeed. Let's switch to first names. Call me Jan." "I'm Jake." Once they were all seated, Jan got right to the point. "Jake, what is the military threat to the Commonwealth that you worry most about?" "Earth." "Earth?" "No question. Interesting, though. That's the first time a CNO has asked intelligence that question, for as long as I've been in the leadership group anyway." "Really?"
Jan asked. Really? We write intelligence assessments on threats, and hopefully someone reads them, but this is the first time a CNO has sat down and asked me that question. Huh. I would have thought it was an obvious question to ask. Hey, I got all these guns, who am I going to be shooting at? Indeed. First time, though, Durand said. Okay, so why Earth? We can divide threats to the Commonwealth into 3 categories. First is internal, but people in the Commonwealth are well informed about what things are like in other places, pretty abysmal on the whole, and they are, for the most part, content. Second is the outer colonies. There isn't any single outer colony that poses a serious threat to us, even to a single Commonwealth system. There hasn't been one for the last several years, since the Fleet Book of Maneuvers finished rolling out. Now, there could be a time when the outer colonies, or some subset of them, unite against us. Collectively, they have more warships than we do, though weighted toward smaller classes. If they also implement our Fleet Book of Maneuvers and our ability to navigate in the inner and outer system envelopes, they would be a serious threat.
As far as the Fleet Book of Maneuvers and our hyperspace navigation capabilities are concerned, we believe that some subset of the outer colonies have possession of those things already, through the foreign agents we've rounded up over the last year. As to the outer colonies or some subset of them uniting, it's something we watch for. High-level delegations, joint military maneuvers, that sort of thing. We haven't seen anything of concern yet, but we expect it at some point. It's a logical step, just as the Commonwealth planets uniting against Earth was a logical step. Okay, I get all that. And Earth? Yes, third is Earth. Earth already has a large unified fighting force in the Earth Space Navy. Militarily, they are a credible threat. As far as their leadership, it is a self-sustaining, closed clique of very wealthy individuals that we have never been able to penetrate. The problem with a system like that is that they could make a decision among themselves to do something, like attack the Commonwealth, and we would have no way of seeing it coming in advance.
As for why, Earth has some grievances with the Commonwealth, some legitimate and some not. We have been bleeding them of their brightest and boldest individuals for years, both through the citizenship exam and our immigration policy. It's worked well for us, and you are a shining example. I would much rather have you in command of our fleets than in command of theirs. Thank you. Durand waved a hand and continued. There are other grievances less legitimate. We are outpacing them in commerce. Most of our people actually work for a living, and our population is outgrowing theirs. This makes us a target for plutocrats. Also, they do not acknowledge our independence, which gives them a legal leg to stand on if they were to, say, reimpose political control over the Commonwealth worlds. Not that there is a higher legal authority to appeal to, but they could make a serious PR case for it at home, for example. So, Earth. Yes, absolutely. And I don't know to what extent your command is prepared for that, Jan. I have no visibility into that. One more thing. How likely do you think it is that Earth will attack us in the next, 10 or 20 years? Jan asked. Hard to say. We would expect that a separation like the Commonwealth declaring its independence would trigger a second war within 100 years to set the matter to rest once and for all. It's been longer than that, but we still consider it better than a 1 in 4 probability, mostly because we don't have the kind of friendly relations with Earth that would make it less likely. Relations with Earth have continued to be pretty frosty. Understood. All right, on to another topic. Maybe 10 years ago, I was a member of a card club that met here in the basement. You and I and Admiral Birkin talked about it a couple years later. I recall. Jake, I need to know if they are ever going to hold the championship game we were talking about, and on what time frame. What sort of time frame are you worrying about? 3 years? No, certainly not. 6 years? A preliminary tournament, I think. Almost certainly. You know, a limited number of participants. I understand. 9 years? Absolutely. That would be the Grand Championship. All the participants will be involved in that one. Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been most helpful. We should meet periodically. It would be our pleasure, Jan. You asked me to find our strategic plan for a war with Earth, ma'am, Ming said. Yes, Megan, what did you find? Jan asked. Nothing, ma'am. You didn't find the plans? No. I found that there are no plans. No plans for a war with Earth? No, ma'am. Jan turned and stared out the window for a long minute. Can you find out what Tian Jessen is up to? He's probably a senior captain. Yes, ma'am. Ming left, and Jan thought, no plans for war with Earth. Well, if they show up in strength, what are we supposed to do? Just surrender or flail at them while going down with the ship? Amazing. Tian Jessen had commanded the 2nd Division of her heavy cruiser squadron this 2nd year on Kodu, and had been a student earlier on the Grand Tour. His ship had survived the Battle of Kodu and been put back into service. He was extremely quick and a natural tactician. He wasn't currently on her NOC staff. Ming came back in. Captain Jessen just rotated back from deployment, ma'am, and is pending assignment.
Could you ask him to come see me, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see how long he has been a senior captain, Megan?
4 years, ma'am. One more thing. Do we have any open areas in the Class 1 secure basements in the NOC?
Yes, ma'am. The Intelligence Division headquarters and the NOC were built at the same time. They have similar facilities in their basements. I believe some of that space is open currently.
Find me a Class 1 secure space for about 20 people in the basements, would you, please? Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, Senior Captain Tian Jessen. Captain, good to see you again.
Good to see you, ma'am.
Megan, can you show us that space in the basement? Ming led them down into the basements and to a conference room that was part of a large separate space segmented off from the rest of the basement. Perfect. Thanks, Megan. We'll find our own way back upstairs. Ming left. Jan made sure the door was secured
And then waved Jessen to a seat.
She sat across from him. I asked Intelligence Division what the biggest military threat to the Commonwealth is, and what do you think they said? Jan asked. Earth. Got it in one. Jessen shrugged.
Tian, I've just been reviewing our plans for a war with Earth, were they to attack us.
Interesting. What are the plans? Jessen asked. Nothing. There aren't any. Well, that's more than a little terrifying. Exactly. I need you to fix that for me, Jan said. What do you want me to do? I want you to gather a staff and run a black project down here to come up with a set of plans for fighting and winning a war with Earth. I want it black because I think we still have agents from Earth on Sigurdsson, perhaps in the NOC. They didn't find any Earth agents in their last roundup, and I don't think it's credible that they don't have anyone here. I don't either, Jessen said. So if they didn't find him or them, then they're still here, and I don't want them to know we're preparing or they might speed up any plans they have. Agreed. I'm going to promote you to Rear Admiral for this project. It's a little early, but not much. You have complete autonomy, reporting only to me. Recruit who you need. But there's no project name because you don't exist. Got it? Jan asked. Got it. I'll help out. Come down and plan with you and your staff. But I have a big hint for you. Yes? Jessen asked. 90% of the Earth population is addicted to VR. Does that give you any ideas? It sure does. Okay, prepare some staff requests and give them to me. Get them to set you up down here. Use Admiral Ming to get you what you need. No work outside of these rooms, Jan said. All right, ma'am, I'm on it. Thanks, Tian. And congratulations, Admiral.
At her next meeting with Admiral Durand and Bill in the basement of the Intelligence Division, Jan had a request.
I have a black intelligence request for you, Jake. Go ahead. I need a network map of the VR network on Earth. Network nodes, connectivity, equipment in place, that sort of thing. Can you do that? Jan asked. I think so. Time frame? 18 months. Budget? Durand asked. Open, whatever it takes. Bill it against the NOC budget, but bundle it in somewhere so it's not a separate line item. Okay. Oh, and Jake? I didn't ask for it. It's some wild hair of yours. Routine intelligence collection, whatever. But it's not for me, Jan said. Of course not. A few months in, and everything settled down, Jan and Bill were relaxing after dinner out on the patio. Jan was feeding Peggy, who'd moved onto bottle feeding at 1 year. It was a very contented time. How long are you going to keep this job? Bill asked. Why? I could really get used to this. That dinner was amazing. No different than any other day, Jan said. Yeah, I know. That's what's so amazing. Jan looked over at Bill. Maybe now is good, she thought. You know, I've been thinking. We had said something about 2 years being a good interval, Jan said. Bill looked over at her. But Peggy's only 15 months old. And 15 plus 9 divided by 12 is how much? Huh. If you want a 2-year interval, the time is now. Right now? Bill asked. Jan laughed and looked at her watch. How about in 2 hours? Let me get this one to bed. Deal. She met occasionally for lunch with the Chief of Naval Research. At one of their meetings, Jan posed a question. Kurt, if something were to happen to Sigurdsson, I don't know, an earthquake or an enemy bombardment or something, and we had to rebuild it, how long would it take?
First thing you would have to do is draw up the plans for replacement.
That could take a while, and then it's a big construction project. You would have to throw up a bunch of temporary buildings first, then build the permanent buildings. It could take quite a while. Could we shorten that process if we had plans all drawn up in advance? Disaster planning sort of thing? Oh, sure. You could get to building right away. What about stocking up on temporary buildings someplace off-site? You know, the materials needed. Would that help on timeframes? You're serious? Yes, I'm serious. Well, sure, that would help as well. Procurement delays are notorious. Why don't we do those things then? Just in case. At her next quarterly meeting with each of her division heads, Jan gave each of them an extra assignment. I want you to do a little assignment for me. If your section of Sigurdsson was going to be completely rebuilt, what would you do? Not sky's the limit, plan to a realistic budget, but assume you could demolish all the buildings on your section of the base and replace them with more modern buildings that better meet your current and projected needs. What would you do? Draw up those plans for me, and then let me have them. Figure, say, 6 months to a year. Take the time to get them right. Oh, and keep this close. I can't do it for everybody. If it gets out, I might not be able to do it at all. The CNR was doing the same thing with his division heads.
Jan periodically went down to the basements to work with Admiral Jessen and his planning crew. Whenever they needed something, and somebody asked, "What project is this for?" the other person would just say, Jessen. So Jessen became the de facto project name. About a year into the project, things started to get reorganized here and there on Sigurdsson. It was subtle and didn't happen all at once. The way in which supplies were procured and stored was modified, so that supplies came in pre-packaged into the shipboard containers. In addition, items with a longer shelf life were queued in advance, with a 9-month supply on hand at all times. When software and data updates were made to ships, a new category under standing orders included code black orders. The contents of those folders were encrypted. They were occasionally updated along with other data uploads to the ships. Evacuation drills were practiced on the base, in which spacers would all assemble for the buses that would take them off base. Everyone on Sigurdsson had a reporting area, where he would queue with others heading for the same location. Each was told to keep a list of what went into their bug-out bag: personal necessities, changes of uniform, personal items of value, real or sentimental. And they were expected to pack that bag and show up with it at drills within 2 hours.
Groups of spacers signing off base to go into town were issued emergency drill trinkets to carry in a pocket. When they buzzed and lighted, all personnel were to report back to the base immediately for evacuation. These changes were implemented at irregular intervals over a period of 9 months or so. They seemed like minor, disparate changes, but they were all part of a single plan.
Maximilian Max Childers Campbell was born when Jan's side project, de facto codename Jessen, was about a year in with a year to go. Senior Chief Maximilian Voipers, retired, known as Max Viper to friends and foes alike, had retired with 30 years in the service about 15 years prior. He lived in Jezgra, where he ran a heavy construction business. Jan and Bill occasionally saw him at social occasions, such as the annual Fleet Day, when Sigurdsson was open to retirees for the festivities. He came out to the hill to visit his namesake, and it was a sight to see the sleeping newborn happily cuddled up into the crook of an arm bigger than he was.
18 months into the project, Intelligence Division delivered to Jan, and she gave to Jessen the complete plans for the Earth's VR network. Everything was finally coming together. Just short of 2 years in, Jessen considered them prepared. If the Earth fleet came calling, they would be ready.